Welcome back, America. Our next guest knows a thing or two about balancing budgets. First, he comes from a state that prides itself in balancing its budget, the state of Tennessee, and he was a mayor that had to do it every day. Now, he's one of the newest members of the U.S. House. He's joining us now from the great state of Tennessee, Congressman Andy Ogles. Congressman, great honor to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's such a remarkable time. I think people, for the first time over the last 2 weeks, it's been a little dramatic, but with that drama comes the great promise that maybe all of this reckless spending that we've been on for 2 decades is going to finally slow down. Tell us a little bit, as a new member of Congress, what you've witnessed behind the scenes and what it portends for the people of America.
Well, as one of the 20 that fought for the new rules package, I think one of the secondary benefits of that process is that America tuned in. America suddenly was paying attention to what was happening in Congress. And so not only did we get a great rules package for myself and others as rank and file members, meaning we're not leadership, we can offer amendments to bills. We can do things to cut spending, which I know is what the American people want.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And that tuning in really showed that people, I think for the first time in a long time, saw hope that maybe Congress would do something different and not keep the status quo. Have you seen in the early days, the first votes that your Congress have taken, a connectivity between the issues that are being passed and what American people want? Is there resonance now among your constituents and the things that have already come to the floor?
Yeah, after we had the rules package and the votes on Speaker, the multiple votes on Speaker, under the leadership of McCarthy and Scalise, we all came together. The very first thing we did was vote to defund the 87,000 IRS agents. And this speaks to our commitment to look for ways to cut spending. Look, the spending is out of control. We know government is broken. So we've got to start thinking outside the box and get back to regular order, which means we're not spending money that we don't have.
Yeah, so important. Now, for a long time as a mayor, you had to have a balanced budget every year. The state of Tennessee has always been great about balancing its budget. The culture in this town is, no, let's not worry about it. We'll kick it down the road. What's the key to getting people onto a path of fiscal sanity going forward?
Well, kind of some of the DC lingo, if you will, is historically over the last few years, the Congress has been acting under this pay-go system, which means you spend money and you pay as you go. And what we've adopted is the cut-go method, which means we're going to cut as we go. So if we're going to spend $1, we got to find a way to save $1. And look, the $1.7 trillion omnibus package that the Senate crammed down the throat of the American people, it's a hard pill to swallow. And we need to push back against those types of spending bills and look for ways of cutting the budget. There's a lot of discretionary spending that should be on the table. There's a lot of money that's spent overseas that shouldn't be spent. We've got to get our own fiscal house in order. Otherwise, we're going to be of no good to the rest of the world, but certainly not to our own national security. And right now, with our spending and our indebtedness to other nations and our porous border, if you look up the definition of a sovereign nation, I'm not sure that we check all the boxes. And so we've got to get our own house in order before we try to save the rest of the world.
Yeah, so true indeed. You have been a big advocate of China-proofing this economy, making sure that we insource the resources that we need, take advantage of what this great country has that God blessed it with. How important is that, and what are some of the early legislation that's moving that to a reality?
Well, it's still early when you speak of specific legislation, but we're going to be getting there. And I think what we saw during COVID is our over-dependency on foreign supply chains. And so anything that we can do to reshore supply chains, meaning that the products are produced here in the United States or even somewhere in North and South America. I'd much rather be dependent on Brazil, who can be an ally and is not a national security threat, than China, who certainly wants to usurp our nation. And, every step of the way, China does what it can to undermine the United States and our sovereignty. You just look at the fentanyl crisis, the chemicals, the precursors that create fentanyl that are killing our children, they're coming from China. They are intentionally sending that to Mexico, to the cartels, to poison the United States of America. They're an enemy of the state, and they should be treated as such. And so as we go forward, I have a very kind of hardline stance against China right now. If they want to be our friend, they should act like it instead of targeting our children with fentanyl.
such an important message. And I think most Americans are getting educated now that China is really the starting point of the fentanyl crisis. That's something a lot of people didn't know for a while. You came to Washington as a brand new freshman. Now, the rule normally has been in this town, if you're a freshman, you keep your head down for the first year. You didn't do that. You jumped right in. You held the line to get these sort of new rules in place. And at the end of the day, the American taxpayer ends up being the winner of these rules. Tell us a little bit why you took that risk, because that's a big risk for a freshman, and why at the end of the day, this new rules package makes a big difference, not for power brokers in Washington, but for everyday Americans.
You look back to the COVID time period. Obviously it was treated differently across the country. Look at DeSantis versus how New York, how they were subjected to the COVID lockdowns. The same thing in Tennessee. I refused to comply with any of the mandates. I refused to comply with OSHA or Biden or anyone that was trying to force people to do something that they didn't want to do. And at the end of the day, I simply followed the Constitution and the law. I came up here to do a job. I didn't come up here to kiss a ring. I didn't come up here to fall in line. I came up here to do a job, which means fighting for the American people, certainly my district, certainly for Tennessee, but for all of America. And what you realize now is that with the church-style committee that was created in this rules package, we can hold the FBI accountable. When you look at the ability for us to cut spending by way of amendments on the floor, germaneness on a bill, meaning that if you want to offer an amendment, it has to be relevant or actually pertain to the bill that you're talking about, single issue, if you will. And so these are all transformative. Many of these things haven't been in place in decades and decades. And so we're moving back to the way that our founding fathers intended. I'm a bit of a nerd. And so the idea that we're suddenly operating the House of Representatives, the way that our founding fathers intended, that's a good thing. Because this is the people's house. I always like to reference John Quincy Adams. He was a member of Congress. He was a senator. He was a president of the United States. He was an ambassador to multiple countries. But when he decided to retire, what did he do? He came back to the U.S. House of Representatives. Why? Because it was the House. It was the body that debated and it argued, and it was the people's house, and it was the body that did the people's work, and that's what I'm here to do.
It's a great strategy. It's done in sports and in politics. When a country gets lost, go back to its origins. Remember where you came from. Right. It always puts us back on course. Yeah, there's no doubt.
That's right. Blocking and tackling, right? You can't score touchdowns if you're not blocking and tackling. And so that's what we got to do. Get back to the basics.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. So I want to ask a little bit about the parents' rights movement in America. It has energized people, put them into the political process, maybe for years where they were outside of it. How important is it at the federal level to reinforce that parents should have a say over their children's education and not have to yield it to bureaucrats or to FBI agents that want to call them domestic terrorists?
Well, this is a huge issue. When I think of education and educating our children, I think of that as being under the purview of the states. I think that's a states' rights issue. I think the Department of Education has gotten much too large. And look, if you want to cut spending, let's cut 40% out of the Department of Education. We'll consider that 20% tax savings for the American people. And then you can push 20% back to the states for, say, third grade early intervention on math and reading. I mean, there's ways here to cut the budget. There's ways here to improve education, but the problem is Washington, not the states. And so what we've got to do is to get D.C. out of, I always like to say, I want D.C. out of Tennessee, right? I don't want some congressman from San Francisco or California or somewhere else teaching my children in Tennessee. And so just as if you're not as conservative as I am, you probably don't want me teaching your children, right? And so this is an issue that we've got to push back to the states. And part of that is we've got to go after the Department of Education. Now we'll look to see what, the Ed and Workforce Committee does as we move forward. And I think you're going to see lots of legislation put forth by other members that really tackles and, quite frankly, attacks the wokeness that has swept the Department of Education.
There's no doubt. As you look out to the great task of not only cutting spending, it's an opportunity to really reshape the federal government, make it more efficient for the American people. You mentioned an approach that I hear a lot of Republicans talking about now. If you shrink a federal agency, you get rid of the bureaucracy, then you take the money block granted back to the states. Is that a model that could apply to more than the Education Department long term?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the discretionary spending is a huge part. So when you talk about this debt ceiling fight, obviously we've got to protect our seniors, we've got to protect our veterans. But even within that, we have revenue coming in with our spending that we do every month, just in your own household. There's monies that you don't have to spend. It's discretionary, and we've got to go after that and start cutting. So again, if we can identify an issue where we're underfunded or we have a deficiency, say like third grade reading or third grade math, all right, let's cut the federal side of the budget, then let's empower the states to do their job. And I would argue that a lot of the problem that we have in the states with our education system isn't the states, and it's certainly not the teachers. You have a lot of great teachers out there that love children and love their job, but the federal government has gotten in the way. And we have all of these, you have to teach to the test now instead of just teaching. And so if we can get the federal government out of the way across the board, I think it improves the quality of life and quite frankly, saves money for the taxpayer.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. We got about 45 seconds left. I want to ask a little bit. I know you're a big champion of freedom. We have a government that now thinks its job is to censor people, to treat parents as domestic terrorists. How do we rein in some of the powers and restore liberty back to the everyday Americans?
That's really important. I think you're going to see, Chairman Comer and Chairman Jordan and their oversight judiciary committees, respectively, issuing subpoenas and bringing in these department heads and these employees and sending a message that if you're a woke employee in the United States government, that's not your job. You have a job to do, go do that. But we've got to start holding people accountable. And again, I think when you look at some of the vaccine mandates that targeted our military and some of our, medical personnel, we need to roll those back and empower an individual to make their own decisions. But those two committees are going to be very busy, oversight and judiciary, and that's where we start holding the line and creating accountability for this government.
There's no doubt people are cheering that on. They're also cheering on the fact that you came right to Washington and made a big difference in your first day on the job. Congressman, what a great honor to have you on the show today. We're going to be following your great work throughout the year.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Good to have you on. Folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but we'll be back with a national security expert that will walk us through the latest as it regards to the FBI, DOJ, and the latest recovery missions of classified documents. Right after this, we'll be talking to President Trump's Deputy National Security Advisor after a quick commercial break.